Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here again. Some familiar faces from the first conference and some new ones. Met some great new people last night. So, yeah, thanks, Belinda, for inviting me. And my background is in psychology. So I'm a psychologist, but I happen to work in adventure education. So I've been in this area now for the best part of 20 years. And just come out of academia. So I'm a PhD, I'm a doctor of psychology and adventure education. I worked at Leeds Beckett University for many years, and now I'm in the commercial sector. I actually work for Inspiring Learning. So I'm their head of impact, head of learning and impact. And the big question for all of us, and the big, I suppose, problem that we face is how do we evaluate what we do? How do we validate the outcomes, but more so, how do we understand the processes of then validating the outcomes? So the processes of change that we all know about, and anecdotally we probably understand, but how do we measure that? How do we evaluate it? How do we prove it? And that's the hardest thing. And not just in the moment stuff, but longitudinally. How do we carry on that great work and impact further into people's everyday life? So I suppose adventure is a state of mind. So how do we measure a state of mind? It's sometimes it's a very difficult thing to even contemplate. Before I begin, I just need to give some context to my new employer. And they give me some facts about the organization that I thought I'd share with you. And they call it our impact. So I'll just get my glasses before we begin. So Inspiring Learning have successfully delivered over 1 million confidence boosting activity sessions this year. We've operated in over 100 different locations across the UK, Europe and Asia. We carried out 74,522 hours of training this year and issued almost 800 qualifications. If you were to visit each one of our operating locations consecutively, you would travel 13,171 miles. That's the distance from the North Pole to the South Pole. We've served over 1 million meals. If you laid all the sausages served at breakfast, including vegetarian and vegan options, end to end, it would stretch 32.2 kilometers. Wow. And Brian told me he had, in order to get that statistic, he had to measure a sausage. Which is, I don't know if that's part of his job description. We've shot approximately 854,460 arrows, which would take a medieval archer 50 days to fire. We taught 94,601 young people how to set goals. No pressure then. No pressure. So that's the company I'm now working for. I'll talk a bit more about them as we go along. So the theme of my talk and the theme of the conference is about psychosocial development of young people, essentially. That's the challenge, I think, the biggest challenge we've faced in a generation. And the literature that I pull on and have contributed to, I've got some of these books with me, are very, very important resources to have. Because what they do is they set out constructs, ideas, philosophies, but more so try to give us solutions to the problems that we face. Academia is one of these areas, I suppose, that people fear because of the language, the terminology, and to some extent, the fact that the material is sometimes not shared as it should be and doesn't impact in terms of evidence-based practice. So I suppose what my challenge is, and I think the challenge of us all, is how do we use material that's proven to some extent, given the hypothesis or the arguments that we try and discover, how do we sort of make that, mold it, and make it usable for our purposes individually and as practitioners? Other texts that I've used, and I know Stephen's here somewhere, I think, or he said he was coming. Stefan, sorry. I know it is. It's not a problem at all, mate. Because I've been reading it and I've got some Brilliant stuff from it so far. Yeah. You're the Amazon person. Yeah, that's me. And also John Finn, who's a friend of mine, a very good book, very usable, user-friendly book. And this is looking at brain biology, which is one of my real pet subjects that I really like. And I'm going to cover some very basic neurobiology towards the end of the talk, which connects very much with embedding impact, not just measuring, but embedding it into what we do. So we all know that there are many faces of impact through outdoor adventure. Okay, we've got lots of images here that we all recognize. It's the immersion, isn't it? That's the thing. It's the immersive nature of what we do, and we understand it. We can even contemplate the impact that it's having immediately. But how do we sort of in the moment capture some essence of what it is that we can then use and validate and have to prove? Because the governing bodies, the people that we work for, the funding organizations rely on evidence, more so than ever before. How can you evidence a smile? You know, and so photographic evidence is imperative, certainly within schools, and photo elicitation, they call it in academia. What the hell does that mean? It means that we try and look at what imagery can do and draw conclusions and evidence from that. But evidence comes in many forms, and we can collect data in many forms. Belinda mentioned qualitative data, quantitative data. This is a profile of a mood state. That's another psychometric test that people can use. And some of them are free. And we can access them online and use them. Yeah, they might not be validated by a university, but they are tried and tested measures that we can use and access. And you've got narratives, which are everything to me. That's the deep, enriched material. That's the person giving you an honest appraisal of what's gone on in their life. And the one in the corner there, I mean, I'll put it up at the end. I don't read through it now. But it was something that changed my philosophy. I was all statistics, hard science, and then that came in when I was, because I'm a practitioner as well, so I take groups into the mountains, and that happened, and it just changed me. The way that I thought about the residential programs I was running. And this came from a university student. And university students are notoriously, certainly now, quite fragile in some respects, coming to university for the first time. So, but we are now facing digital technologies and there are numerous digital ways to capture information in the moment and then use that later. And speak to schools, speak to partners. These kids now are so IT savvy, more so than we ever have been. So the notion of not embracing technology, I think, is one that might set us back a bit. And I've done sessions where students have used phones and not used them and seen the difference in terms of the restorative value of nature. And there is academic, credible research to substantiate the use of phones to show the benefit of not using them in some respects because of their attention capability. So when someone's watching a screen like that, their attention is completely immersed in that moment. And then once they're measured on their attentive capability after that, it's all over the place because they've been zoned in on one or two images that they're expecting to come across. Anyway, going off the I usually do this, go off the killer. But Kingswood, for example, have just announced a new confidence tracker. So a digital technology that's going to try and evaluate confidence, not just in the moment, but also afterwards. So involving the parents, involving the person, involving the teacher, and trying to evaluate the resonance of the experience that they've had. So impact, yeah, I mean, it involves everyone, it involves every aspect of our life. So our personal situation, the social connections that we have, which I think are probably the most important thing. We learn best by collaboration, without a shadow of a doubt. And also the institution that we work for, our institution, the ecology in which we operate is going to impact on us. So we need to think about the fact that the impact is not just on the person, it's on a whole network of influences around that individual that we need to influence. We need to share. So that's why parents, teachers, peers, anyone who's important to the person that they value needs to be involved to some extent in this process, certainly after the event, and even within it. Why should teachers sit on the sidelines? They need to be in this stuff. So it's like that, really. That's what's happening. Yeah, it's more interactive, and there are cogs in the wheel that all influence each other. So yeah, inspiring learning. I have to give them a shout out, obviously. They've got many brands, and they're trying to do that. I mean, that hasn't come up very well, but they're trying to unlock potential in individuals, and that's very difficult when you've got a huge audience. But I believe in what they do, and I believe in what they're trying to achieve. And it's about changing mindsets, changing how people view themselves in terms of their adaptability and personal capability. Now, you'll see that I put a note on each chair. This area of resilience, which is my area, positive psychology and resilience, man. Last time I gave a talk, and it talked about the rope of resilience. I don't know if people remember that, but this idea that we walk along a rope, and the thickness of our rope denotes our capability to adapt in circumstances that sometimes are beyond our control. This is a very basic psychometric measure that anyone could use and anyone can get access to. And it's immediate. It just gives you something to hang on to. So just fill it in whenever you want while we're going through this, and we'll pick it up at the end. So like I said, and what has been talked about, Martin talked about it, everyone seems to be very in tune with the fact that we need to look at solutions. And certainly what Stefan's done within his work and within the book is looking at this sort of idea of solution-focused practice. But like I said at the beginning, we know about the input and the output. And this is Alan Hewitt's black box theory from 1983. That's how long we're going back here. And we're still not understanding what goes on in the middle. We haven't shed enough light into that area of what makes the difference. How do we know? What are the active ingredients of change that we need to manipulate in order to get the outcome we desire? And more than that, how do we evaluate it, measure it, and use it? That's the most important thing. We know that it's not just about outcomes. It's got to be about process as well, because process generates outcome. That's the only thing we can manipulate, the process. The outcomes will come as a result of what we do. And there is a combination of factors, a menu of factors that influence outcome and process. And these are the main areas that are influential. And this comes from Marcia McKenzie's work right back at 2000, when she talks about what are the active ingredients of change? What are the things that happen within that black box? Yeah? And I've tried to look at this in more detail over the last 20 years, on and off, yeah? And try to look at it also from a biological perspective, and we'll cover that a bit later, from a neurobiological perspective, because our brains are the things that drive us. And now there's more and more evidence to suggest that we can identify areas of the brain that dictate our behavior. And it's not that we can shine a light on the brain, obviously, but we can identify behaviors that are attributed to certain things that are happening in a person's mind that we can then use and identify and build practice around that. You're all going, really? But research is not a magic pill. Yeah? And there is no magic pill for this stuff. We need to build mechanisms that matter. We need some fundamental rationale for doing what we do. We need goals. We need objectives. They have to come from somewhere. We need a hypothesis. Yeah? We are given tasks to do. This is a group. I want you to do this with this group. So how the hell do we do that? And how do we measure it? And how do we try and identify if the goal's been achieved? So that's a very difficult thing sometimes. And we are so busy and we are so on it that we're giving enjoyment, which is perfectly fine because that's positive emotion and that builds memories. And it has impact. We know that for a fact. Again, brain biology. the fact that the hippocampus, which is in the midbrain, which is sat next to the amygdala, which is where the emotions happen, the memories and the emotions happen simultaneously. So the higher the emotion, the better the memory. We know that, but we still need some degree of process that we understand and can use. So without a goal, and without a plan, it's just a wish. And that's fine if the end product is just we want to go out and have a great time. But more and more so, we are bombarded with what's the impact? What's this going to do for their academic attainment? What's it going to do for their ability to rebound when things don't go well? What are you actually measuring? What are you actually evaluating? What do you actually do out there? We all know that. We're all advocates. We all believe it. The anecdotal evidence is overwhelming. And now, to some extent, the empirical evidence is catching up. But there are still major gaps. Longitudinal data. No theory of change. That's the thing that's come out recently. There's no sort of structure that we use. And people will have probably heard of theory of change. This idea that there's a systematic process that sort of identifies certain elements that we have to include when we build a program. And there are certain things that we need to ensure that gives robustness to our practices. So any research program or process needs to have these 4 factors. You need to be unbiased and neutral. You need to be able to generalize from what you do, because otherwise it's not used. And you need to be reliable in what you're delivering. And that doesn't mean you do the same thing every time. That's impossible. But to embed some reliability into what you do is important. And that's why standard tests, standardized questionnaires can complement anything you do that is bespoke. And I'm not saying don't do bespoke, because bespoke is everything for me. In fact, there's data to suggest that anything bespoke is better than a generic session, because it applies directly to the needs of the group. And I'll show you some of the data in a minute. So that's important. Are we being ethical in what we do? Yeah? And I'm sure we all are. But there are standards that we need to meet. And any work that you do in partnership with the school or with the university, any research, anything that you do needs to have this ethical robustness attached to it. And we do this, we know this. We have parental consent forms, don't we? Risk assessments, we're all over the place with this stuff. And sometimes it actually inhibits what we want to do in terms of risk and trying to bring about some of this magic that happens in the black box. So we do need a mechanism, I suppose. And this is an example here from some research we did many years ago now, looking at the resilience, the buzzword, the resilience, the stuff that people talk about all the time. This idea of positive adaptability or bouncing forward, not bouncing back particularly, it's growth. It's being adaptable and moving, shifting forward all the time. So we had a problem. We had students that were dropping out, poor transition, falling out all over the place, fragile, I said earlier on. We needed to profile the students, and we needed to give them something that was going to heighten their capability to adapt to the new circumstances in which they faced. And universities have been doing this for years. Unfortunately, some of them now are dropping off, which is really quite tragic, because the data suggests that resilience can be built and can last. So we've got this poor transition, fragility, dropout. The goal, the theory of change, we've got a goal, we need to build their resilience. What's the rationale, says the Vice-Chancellor with his checkbook. Well, adventure enacts change. Does it? Who said? Is it going to improve their academic capability? Are they going to stay here? Well, if we save 2 or 3 of them, we've paid for the residential, actually. Oh, right, okay, go ahead. But I want you to prove it. So we need to make an assumption that we can do that, and we tailor the program to meet that goal. So we've got to have measures that drive the program design. Does that make sense? So that whatever you're trying to measure, whatever you're trying to achieve, and this is not just putting the cart before the horse, that's not not what we're saying here. We're saying that we build a program that is fit for purpose. And the activities, high support, high challenge. Philosophies that we really know about that builds capability. Got to be high support. Yeah, we all know about this comfort zone. I call it an idiom. It's an idea. It's not a model particularly. It's an idea that we expand our comfort. We need big comfort zones, huge ones. Yeah? And that is done by high support, high challenge. There's a lot to be said now for people being in a comfortable position in an adventurous situation. Everyone's comfort zone is slightly different. Adventure is a relative concept. Yeah, being in some of the work that's going on here, you know, these outcomes are very important, because inner city people, inner city children, this is their playground, this is their adventure. They can't go to crags, they can't go to the natural setting. It's not within their remit. So we bring adventure to them. But high support challenge, and I think what's really important, and Chris Webber's here somewhere, don't know where he is, he's up there, he's here. PhD student Chris Webber talked to me about teaching with transfer in mind. And that's his PhD. He's doing loads of great work in that area. I know because I've supervised some of his work. Brilliant. And that's really important. You have to think about, in the moment, what's this going to do for the future? If I do this, how's it going to resonate? Outputs. The assets and resources on this resilience sheet, you can see them. They're broken down into subcomponents, we call them. These are the things that we build. Emotional competence, social connectedness, physical dynamics. We forget about the physical exercise notion of this. Moving is so important. Reflect it. If you're going to reflect, move while you're reflecting, because you get better ideas. You know, keep the momentum. And obviously cognitive capabilities or problem-solving skills. We found that peer-staff relationships went up, and the skills needed for transition were realized. And we had counseling staff as well working with us in some of this. And we produced a really good paper some years ago, I think it's about 2014, in the British Journal of Guidance and Counselling, that looked at resilience and the notion of young people coming in and needing this sort of stuff. And they started doing green counselling as a result of that. They understood the power of what we were doing. And now some universities don't even have any counselling services. It's all farmed out, which is tragic again. So student resilience is enhanced. And then the impact, hopefully, we did see dropout rates decreasing, retention increased. Certainly academic capability went up. How the hell did you do that? Well, what we did, we found the resilience scores at the beginning of the year, mapped them, correlated them to their end of year academic output. And we found that the more resilient young people, before and after the program, were the ones that were going to get the higher grades. For females only, though. Males tended to report higher resilience and actually not pull through on that. So there was some pseudo stuff going on. There's some male bravado going on with some of the students. And their scores that went down is, in theory, is a bad thing, but it's realignment. So that's why I put resilience is enhanced or realigned. It can go down, and that can be a good thing, because the next time they come across it, it'll go up, because it's more in tune with their own perception. Remember these measures that we give people as self-report measures. So that's the theory of, going back. Whoa. Yeah, this is some data. Oh my God, what does that look like? A lot of little H's on a graph. What? Little weird little things going on. What the hell does that mean? I thought that, and I wrote it. But yeah, again, you get a journal and you're looking at, or you get an academic, not even academic papers. You get thinking, you just go, like those posters out there. It's like, what the hell's that? Yeah, all right, it looks clever, but what does it mean to me? So sometimes you have to cut through that crap and understand some of the stuff that it represents. This is the stuff you go, here's Vice Chancellor. There we go. Can you explain that to me? So what we've got here, we've got our outdoor adventure people, 2,500. Yeah, we've got a smaller at-home comparison group. Yeah, that's very small, I know, and that's, it's a token gesture to some extent. But the power of that number is huge in statistical terms. 2,500 kids coming through a university, yeah, across 16 courses. And they filled out what's called a CD risk scale. That's a 25-item resilience scale that's been used with young people. It's been used across the world. It's very reliable and valid and understandable. That's one thing, again, when you're using anything like this, make sure it's understandable by the respondents, otherwise it's meaningless. So it needs to be age appropriate. It needs to be specifically aligned with their ability to complete it accurately. When you see a scale, sometimes you can see scores all down the middle and you think, oh yeah, right. You're not even, so it's got to be very well implemented and talked about and explained. In fact, I've seen questionnaires being cut up into little blocks where children will put them in piles to identify how often do you do this? Well, I do it there, then I do it there. Give them a piece of paper and they think it's some sort of alien thing. Putting it on an iPad, then they sort of get that. But or they value it. So we've got this OA intervention group, and this is a mean score, an average score. That's why it's got that weird little plus minus, because SD is a standard deviation. That means the spread around the mean. The bigger the standard deviation means the average is unreliable to some extent. It's got to be a smallish standard deviation. So you know that the central score is sort of representative of the group. That's fine. Mean scores is one score. It's not great. You know, I mean, how can you possibly have 2,500 people and they're all the same? But you've got to have a central notion to grab hold of. And you can see you've got 2 points, 2 little upside down T's. Yeah, that's the standard deviation. That's the spread around the average. And the angle it goes up is the difference. The angle that the other one, this is the total score. The angle that's going down is showing a decrease. So the kids that are on the OA intervention, the impact of that is positive at that moment in time. Those that have stayed back at, we called it at home, back at university, they went down. This lot here, the coloured versions, are just the sub-components of the score. So just like that sheet you've got, there are different colours on that questionnaire. The colours represent different aspects of what resilience is. These are the different aspects of this particular scale. And sometimes the subcomponents, that's the devil's in the detail. That's what you can target. And in these cases, there were things like my competence, trust in myself. That's self-confidence, in other words. The level of change that I can deal with, the level of control, and spirituality. So you've just been doing mindfulness stuff and yoga, and the real quiet, slow learning is as important. The restorative stuff is as important as the high octane material. Really important, because that's the time when you reflect. That's the time when new neural pathways are actually consolidated. So spirituality, you wouldn't think resilience, spirituality? Absolutely. So that's some data. That's hard data. That's published peer-reviewed data. And we've got an effect size up there, whatever that means. Do you know what an effect size is for the people in here? Again, it's a statistical notion of impact. Anything above 2 is deemed to be impactful, 0.2. And it's really easy to measure. If you've got mean data, average data, and a standard deviation, you just take one score from the other in terms of the two groups, yeah, the 2 standard deviations. It's quite simple. Look it up, Cohen's effect size. And it gives a notion of impact. People go, oh, right, I get that. That's a standard language that everyone gets. Okay, moving on. How do we embed some of the practices that I've talked about? And we have to make things context specific. So I've been approached many years by football academies where their kids are going through massive transitions every year. They're either thrown out or they're taken on or they're not, they're binned. The dropout rate in Premier League academies is frightening. 1 in 100 will make it a career. That's not in the club they're at, any club. 99% will drop out. They need something else. They need capability. They need to know what to do when they don't know what to do, if that makes sense. So we've trying to build resilience and measure them and give them exercises to do in order to keep them on a trajectory of growth. How do you deal with being told you're not in the team? Who deals with that fallout? You know, kids are fragile. And certainly when some of the pupils within these groups of young footballers have been at a club since they were 6 years of age, and then they're binned at 18, it's, you know, what's that all about? And very few of them have decent exit strategies. So this club, Leeds United, anyway, we're quite proactive in their educational welfare. And I sort of came up with this idea of the rope thing again, trying to give the kids an analogy that they could understand and recognize, and that they walked along a tightrope. And these weird balls here in the little bags is their balance. And we talked about the fact for every challenge that we find and everything that we do in our life is based around the balance between positive and negative emotion. We know that. So for every negative thing that happens, they need to counterbalance it with 3 positive. This is coming from work that's been done in grounded positivity by Barbara Friedrichsen. And that ratio is a guideline. It's not, you know, it's not gospel, but it makes sense because negative things have real resonance. They stick with us. The amygdala goes nuts. You know, the stress center goes overload. So we need to counterbalance it. And coaches need to understand that notion. Parents do. And when we're delivering in the outdoors, we have to have this notion of challenge, choice, and support. We can't go down this route of dissonance being everything and adapting to disruption, learning from avoiding failure. Failure is great. Go for it. Fail forward all the time. And this is what we tell these guys, you know, because they're terrified to even play when they're being assessed. So we used a lot of outdoor activities to build this. We took them away on residentials. We did work with them. We did work with the coaches. We worked with the staff. And we tried to embed some of the practices that we delivered in the outdoors into their everyday focus. Am I all right for time? Yeah? Okay. And we give them questionnaires. Hey ho, it's my CD risk again. It's usable. We can use it. We have subcomponents, and I changed the names of the subcomponents so they could understand them. So we talked about knowing myself, getting better, belonging, responsibility, working with others. And we called them strands. Yeah? And we said we need to build your rope. So we build your resilience rope, measure it, give me a score on each of these areas, and all these are subcomponents of that. So certain questions make up that. Yeah? Like I said before, it's the subcomponents that are the important thing. Because you build that then, so you build a program just around knowing myself and trusting myself, depending on what they've said. And they got the strands of the rope, they got a coloured strand and made their rope. And the colours that were the most dominant colours were the ones that they were happy with. And then what they did then is they did the intervention and carried on with this rope idea, and until they got and they were happy with a rope that reflected their capability. And really, when we talk about resilience, it has to have every colour. Because otherwise you'll be like this. You'll be falling off. Some thickness, being able to work with others, yeah, that's great. But if you don't know yourself or a sense of belonging or responsibility, then it's difficult. And most psychological constructs are made up of certain attributes that contribute to the total totality of that behavior. The reason why we put it in context is that it was meaningful and useful. The coaches got it, the kids got it. Inspiring learning are going to get it. All right, because it sort of works to get it, you know, and it's a concept that can be actually then built upon and used as a template. So that was the rope there. That's just, we just had a booklet, a digital booklet that they completed. We all know the importance of reflection, don't we? You know, we know about experiential learning. We know that it's a really dynamic way of learning. We know by learning by doing is so effective. It's sometimes out there and difficult to capture. And we use different reflective techniques, don't we? So I built in a reflective technique, and we call that the knots in the rope. Yeah. So when you come across a problem, which is number 2, that's going to block your goal, which is number 1. Yeah, what are we going to do here? How are we going to create a solution-focused approach to get and design something to get going again? So this is the trajectory here, the knots in the rope idea, using reflective practice with the coaches to do that, but also asking them to record examples of their goals. Like I said before, tailor-made is everything. Yeah, and this fit also with their personal profiles for their educational welfare officer, because every school has people that are responsible for welfare of children. Every football academy have got people that are in there for safeguarding purposes, and they have plans. We built this into their plans, so we had a profile going on. So it's embedded into what they did. And you can do this. You can create these things. What I thought was really important was this, and this is bespoke, what we call willful self-watching, longitudinal stuff. So we got them to label cogs, the people that are important for them, continuously. And it might have been 1 week it was the coach, 1 week it might have been the best mate, but they got an idea of the people that influence them. And that can then resonate, and the coach can go, right, so that person's important to you. Well, we want to build this cog, that cog. This idea here, this self-watching idea, was we give them ideas of goals to set. And then they scored themselves out of 10 on each day. And this is just for them. If they didn't do it, fine. But did they get sleep for 8 hours? Did they ask for help when things turned ugly? And if they did, what was the score they gave themselves out of 10? And it's a self-watching exercise. It's a diarising effect. It's very important because it comes from them, and they set their own targets, and they can identify areas they need to work on. Maybe to do with their rope. I don't know. Okay, so that's some examples from a football academy, and we work, and you guys will work a lot with young people in different environments, youth work, social work, schools, and we've done quite a lot of work with school groups. Again, transitional stuff. How do you measure or how do you evaluate something that enables someone to make that leap from one year group to the other, or a primary school to a secondary school? You know, and what are the things that are important for us to understand? This compassion and honesty and integrity. You get schools who have mission statements all the time, and if you look on their websites, they've always got, this is what we do, and this is the language we speak. Everything we do is about integrity. But yeah, okay, so how do you measure that? Oh, well, we don't, but that's what we do. All right, okay, it's good for the parents, they get it. But what do the teachers? Well, they all know about it. Well, what about the kids? Yeah, they know about it. They actually say, well, I'm really resilient today. And you go, so what does that mean? I have no idea. But that's been resilient for me. And I think that is a picture. Well, I asked them to go across this thing here. I think the point I'm making here is you can have all the questionnaires in the world, and you can have all the psychometric tests and blah, blah, blah. And then, yeah, that's good. That's been integrity. That's integrity and compassion, isn't it? Isn't it, teacher? Is it? Yeah, big time. Tap into creativity, foster their ideas, get them evaluating themselves and giving you evidence. Yeah, and you can then add that value back into what you do. To me, that says everything. Right, okay, I'll just go back for a second. Yeah, so I talked earlier on about questions and subdomains of questionnaires and things like that. They can act as a guideline. Yeah, they can act as a guideline, mainly for teaching. We also used a construct called self-determination, which is basically empowering people. And again, some of these tests are free and used, and you can use them. It's how you use them and what you use of them that's the most important thing. And I've talked quite a lot about statistics and stuff, and the hard data, the empirical stuff that people really get off on. I get off on that sort of stuff. But also, unfortunately, you do have to sort of dig around and get some credible material. So we use this self-determination theory. And what we did is we used that concept. And I think the guys, Chris yesterday talked about this idea that self-determination, the guys on the Battleback project, it's about autonomy, yeah, competence and relatedness. These three sort of dynamic factors that have to be all in tune with each other in order to be motivated intrinsically, doing it for the love of something. So when you question, sometimes having a concept in mind is good. So we framed our questions based around these three areas to get the sort of responses that we wanted. And I know that sounds like you're, again, putting the cart before the horse type thing, and you're sort of, you're brainwashing them. You're not. What you're doing is you're enabling them to explore aspects of their character that you want to change, you want to benefit from, and they want to benefit from, and the teachers can take that away. And we actually found working in this way was good, that we found certain elements of their narrative to be categorized and give them that back straight away. So the colors here represent the three areas. We also measured their psychological well-being using a scale that I've shown out on the posters out there that is free for people to use unless you're a commercial operator. So charities can use them for free, non-for-profit operators like yourselves. So you get that construct that's workable. Oh God, the H's again. But again, we found, now you get this, don't you? You now know it, don't you? Rather than self-determination, rather than resilience, we've got self-determination scale. We've got the three areas: autonomy, competence, relatedness. And we measured three different conditions. Something that's specific and tailor-made and fit for purpose. Kids who stayed back in induction. And a sort of off-the-shelf pack, a commercial off-the-shelf pack. But not so much commercial, but just generic, that was delivered without any thought of what the outcome might be. Yeah, I'm not dissing commercial operators, obviously, no way, because we are moving Inspiring Learning towards getting more bespoke, problem-focused approaches to be taken. But you can see, yeah, that the red tailor-made specific one had a more significant impact. In fact, the kids that stayed at school, their relatedness went down. So again, evidence to suggest that if you work with teachers, work with the organization, understand really what they want in terms of compassion, integrity, honesty, and blah, 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 is embedded in what you do. Speak the language the school speaks. At the moment, we're using or thinking of using something called a skills builder program that's out there that talks the language of schools. We're going to use that within our programs so that when that language is taken back into school, and this is an accredited life skill development, the teachers can be involved in the delivery on site with us and then have that with them when they go back to the classroom. And we know that those skill sets improve academic attainment. One thing that COVID did identify was if you didn't have the fundamental building blocks to build academic competence on, you were sort of sticking your finger in the air a little bit. So they were asking kids to get reconditioned into academic thinking when they had nothing to draw upon. That's our statistical representation. Again, just to show you how stats work in terms of psychological well-being. This is the scale, the Warwick Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale, that anyone can access. And again, we found that well-being went up statistically significant for those people who know about inferential statistics. Well-being went up. Numbers are not massive, and anyone who's out there going, yeah, blah. Well, yeah, it's a case study type approach, but it still resonates. I mentioned earlier on about academic integration, extremely important teachers-wise, because they love the fact that you can embed some of their work into what you do and see output and show that it means something. There's a lot out. I mentioned this study earlier on about restoration of stress and mental fatigue using phones, the impact of phones in the outdoors. You go, what? But yeah, really, it's important that you embed life skills, but also things that are relevant for the people that are accessing it. And certainly this is difficult when you've got groups that really don't want to be there. You know, we're going there again. You know, or kids that have these very, very vulnerable lives where they felt and they need to be supported. This one quite interesting. Self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is our confidence in a given situation or context. Our self-belief. So the belief in risk-taking in the outdoors then, so according to this study, impacted on essay writing. They felt more, I can risk-take in my writing now. I feel more empowered to be a bit more flamboyant and a bit more sort of out there. Great stuff. We love that. Creativity. Yeah. Creativity, curiosity, collaboration, communication. 4 C's. Have you heard of that stuff? Yeah. Have you heard of key skills? Toddler brain. Anyone read that? Read that book. Brilliant book by Laura Janner talking about key skills. QI, as in key. Force for living, force for life. And she talks about the importance of me, we, wobbling, wibbling, all these great terms that essentially is about growing up with risk-taking at the heart of what you do. To move to a level where you are being creative. Okay, what's that? God damn it. Yeah, lizard brain, monkey brain, amygdala. That's a brain. Looks like a radiator, doesn't it? A moist radiator even, because it's wet. 90% of the brain's made of water. We learn by doing, don't we? We all know that. And that's the brain that's wired through hands-on experience and interaction with the physical world. We know that the brain develops new neural pathways, neurogenesis, they call it, neuroplasticity. The brain is plastic and it molds itself in terms with the experiences that we have and give it. So the diet of holistic challenges that Adventure presents is a perfect way of building brain resilience. The ability for the brain to bounce and grow. We wrote a paper, Toddler Brain, I mentioned that. Again, some really cool books here. This one in particular. The one I mentioned, 3-to-1, the 3-to-1 idea. This changed the way I think, brain rules. This is showing a distinct reason for going outside in terms of the protein the brain generates as a result of exercise in nature, and says that makes us smarter. Yeah, you know, it's all there. Why isn't it used? Because people get frightened by it. And I've got a copy of this at the back. That's another great book by Richard Davison. So we put the brain in the middle of that lot. Do you remember we talked about these components of change? I said earlier on, we tried to look at these aspects in the black box and look at them through the lens of neurobiology. This is the 4th wave of resilience research now. It's gone from knowing the characteristics of someone and describing what they do as being resilient to now looking at what builds that. Neuroscience is showing the way. Little light there that comes on. That took me hours. time well spent on the 15th version. So we've got this brain resilience idea. Myself and Jim McKenna and Karen, who's a bone specialist, but loves the idea of neuroscience. She's now working outside the academic institution as well. Jim's a legend in physical activity, health and well-being, and still at Leeds Beckett. We thought, he knew my passion for the outdoors, and he said, we need to shed a light into this black box thing that we keep talking about. Let's do it from a brain. He was reading all this brain stuff, and so was I. Let's look at it from a brain dynamic. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. The Australians loved it. They published it. Not so much over here. Anyway, it's not all right. It's okay. Who cares? It's out there. And it was about this idea of positive adaptation, neurodevelopment through exposure just to nature. We know that just being out there gives us a feeling of well-being, don't we? Emotional highs and lows. It's how we manage that. But it's a biological instinctive response to something that's uncertain and difficult and challenging and thrilling at the same time. But the brain works as we all work, by adaptation, by doing something, recovering, building, adapting, pruning even, pruning. To make a tree grow bigger and stronger, you prune it, don't you, and it grows back. That's just what happens in the brain too. There are pathways that actually are shortened and then grow thicker. So we were looking at this idea of, and what you're thinking, well, what's this got to do with impact? Well, if you get this, you can build it into your practices. You can sort of get why people respond in the way that they do, and then measure it and evaluate it, or you tell them about it and they go away and understand it, and that stays with them. So we're looking at this idea of windows of plasticity. Yeah? Windows of trainability, areas when we're delivering in the adventure setting that we can get and use it. So this is 2012, 10 years old this, and we're rewriting it at the moment because things are moving that fast, but it's still relevant. We think it's still relevant. So the setting, where we are, the environment, very important, isn't it? So on this side, left side, we've got what we now know about the brain in an environmental setting that's nature-based, that's adventurous. What sort of impact do you think that might have, and how can that guide what we do? So bear with me, there's a lot of writing on here. I tried to cut it down, but we know the brain loves learning from mistakes. It absolutely loves failure because it gives it a chance to grow and prosper. It interprets and acts upon incoming sensory information as a whole. Hey, don't we do that? Multi-sensory information, all the senses and more. The more elaborate and repetitive the information, the better and the more memorable it is. Makes sense, doesn't it, really? 85% of what we do, we don't actually consciously know about. Did you know that? This is happening automatically. Nature elevates mood. It increases vitality, spiritual awareness, focus, and attention. Going back to my phone exercise. It does. We know that. Biophilia. The biophilia people, the notion that we have an innate connectedness to nature. The guys at Essex University have been looking at this for years. Jules Pretty, people like that. So if we know that, how do we then see impact as a result of using that information? Well, what we need to do is allow freedom to fail. And we've got a reason for that now. Oh, the brain likes it. Yeah, the risk assessment people might not like it, but yeah, we like it. As long as it's controlled, and as long as we're in there. This idea of risk-taking now is hot topic as ever it was. We need to explore. We need exciting multiple cues for different senses. Unisensory settings are dull. Ken Robinson, ever heard of Ken? And his TED Talk, the amazing TED Talk that he did on factories and schools and Victorian sort of factory lines. Mental power of physical skills. This is the most thing that freaked me out. By climbing and having the skills to climb can actually then create neural pathways alongside of it that can be used for other things, like problem solving, mathematical skills. What? Really? Climbing makes you smarter? Damn right it does. Allow immersion into nature. You know, I talked about spirituality. slow, mindfulness, time out, in order for these pathways to consolidate, for learning to be embedded. Quiet time's everything. I'm sure you all do it. Go into a woodland and the kids lie them on the floor, look at the trees and shut up, which is really hard to do. But they get the sense of they're uncertain out there. They don't like it. They hate it. It's like, oh. But it's important. Activities. We know this. Over-threatening situations, downshift to lower order functioning. The amygdala takes over. You forget things because you're scared. So what do? We need thriving activities that are open-ended. Open-ended. If you don't get to the top, it doesn't matter. So what? You know, the group, yes, did, but it's a different group, different things, different people, different environment. Choice is everything, to a point, obviously. But anxiety should not be overused for generating growth. It doesn't work. Dissonance doesn't work. It delivers lower order thinking. They call it system 1 thinking. We need to move to system 2 thinking. Positive emotions 3 to 1. This idea of a broadening and build idea of resilience. Because we know that the strength of negative emotions are stronger than positive ones. However, positive emotions resonate longer in memory. In the moment, negative emotions are designed to get us out of the shit in that moment. The survival mechanism kicks in. Processing. Processing is experiential learning. How does the brain process information and make sense of it? How meaningful can an experience be to the brain? I'm miles over, aren't I? Right, sorry. Is it okay if I carry on? All right, okay. So, not almost there. Almost there. 5 minutes. Yeah. Focus and memory is linked to the exploratory value and emotional intensity. So we need to balance novelty with known experiences. Bring what they know to the environment that they're in. So it's not novel. It's not like, you know, the big argument of young people going to an adventurous setting is this isn't my everyday life. So what? I've had a great time, go back to the crap of everyday life. We've got to connect those two together somehow and bring adventure to them. That picture I showed you with the kids in the mud pond or whatever it was, that was in the local park down the road from the school. That's where it was. Those were kids from an inner city school in Bradford in West Yorkshire. It plays to play around. Lackluster and overcrowded activities cause people to switch off because we know that this helps. Humor, mild apprehension enables positive adaptation. Another classic is the human brain can't multitask. Think it can, but it can't. So it's got to be organized with chunks of learning and interruptions for explanation. And that doesn't have to be long-winded, but reflecting in the situation is important because you are getting the capture in the moment and reflecting immediately to consolidate that understanding. Participants. Yeah, we know that there are differences between people and they are remarkable differences. Even identical twins, their brain configuration is different and it will be dictated by the environment. But we do know that promoting effort and perseverance and growth is what underpins emotional intelligence, which has been seen now by industry as more important than IQ ever was. The group. Obviously, we have a part of our brain, and we don't really know this, that there are centers of the brain that deal with altruism, empathy, trust. There are centers that light up when that behavior happens. We know that through magnetic resonance imaging now. And we have things called mirror neurons, if people have heard of that, where you look at a person and you reflect their feeling. You can actually be intuitive into what they're feeling because we are designed to understand other people in terms of empathy. Because we're social creatures, we work together. We learn best in groups. So collaboration is everything. And I think being here this week is about collaboration. And finally, the instructors. Yeah, this idea of being able to, they call it a golden age of empathy now and emotional intelligence, EQ, rather than IQ. This idea that risk perception, intuitive impact is very important for an instructor to have. One classic example is, how do we know what another person is feeling? We talk about perceived risk all the time, don't we? Perceived risk this, perceived risk that. How do we understand how can we perceive the risk for someone else? Because perception is a purely subjective area. So we have to try and be objective to some extent and look for telltale signs, and we do it all the time. And our brain is able to do that. There is such a thing as gut instinct and intuition. It exists, so use it. That's the sheet that I showed you at the beginning. There, we've got it. Like I said, play with it, do what you want with it. But it's taken from this book by Robert Brooks. And as I said, there are subcomponents that are important, that give you an idea. The colours reflect the dynamics of what resilience represents. So to summarize, Belinda, impact is on a spectrum. It's relative, it's subjective. Arguably, objectivity is the key, because we need to be objective to some extent and evidence-based. Research is hierarchical to some extent. We talk about things like narratives being lower order than randomized controlled trials. They're just different. You have to apply them in a different way. One's not particularly better than the other. Everything's relevant. You just have to use it effectively. We can't do randomized. Well, there are movements to do randomized controlled trials in the outdoors, but hard stuff. You don't need to be doing that. Find a niche and address a problem. Theory of change drives a design, like I said, that we used. Work in collaboration. Look beneath the surface. Look in the black box. Trying to make a difference there. Because if you can understand the processes of change that drive outcomes, you can then build evidence-based practices which can be used to change policies and lives.